As I mentioned, Angus Taylor is now the leader of the Liberal Party, thus the coalition, thus the opposition. His first task upon taking the job, and if you were watching our live coverage on Friday, I thank you, was an anticipation about what he was going to say that would be any different than what was being said the week before, the month before, or even, let's be honest, a couple of years before, because all of that had been rejected and rejected multiple times by the Australian people. The challenge is multi-fronted, and any multi-front war is always a difficult one to fight because, of course, you have the government in its strongest electoral position that it has been in a generation, and certainly the highest at the moment. You know, the flank of One Nation, and then again you throw in the Tiffany Teals and a whole bunch of other things. It is an unenviable position to be in, but signs of life, perhaps. An opinion poll has just been released by the 9 newspapers, The Age, the Sydney Morning Herald and the Brisbane Times, and it shows a ever so slight tick up for the Liberal and National Party. One Nation still remaining above, is actually now going from above to now dead heating them. Now, as you can see, Labor, basically where it was at the last election. I think they might be 1 point under, but still. The Liberal National Party way under. Remember, the Greens have basically floated around that 11. So the variable is always One Nation, and they are a little down from the last poll, which was 2 weeks ago. The Libs are a little up in the last poll. Now, let's have a look how this is in terms of under the last poll under Susan Lee versus the first poll under Angus Taylor. Now, One Nation, as you can see there, was going from 25 to 25, but you are seeing here a little uptick for the coalition there with 3 points. Where does it come from? Well, as you can see, it is one off the independents. It is theoretically one off the Greens and one off Labor. So all of that is rounding errors. This poll, of course, had to be completed by today, so did cover a little before, but essentially the changeover time of Friday and Saturday. Now, to give you an idea of just how strong One Nation's position is, and it is not a regional Queensland phenomenon that is somehow flipping the books. Let's have a look state by state. Now, remember, you need about 14% to be able to get a Senate seat. That would clearly mean another senator would be going in from New South Wales, as they currently sit at 24%. The Liberals down to 21, Labor at 32. In Queensland, now, interestingly, there is support for One Nation in New South Wales is 1 point higher than it is in Queensland. But in Queensland, the LNP is in front of One Nation. The margin, though, to Labor is a little bit tighter. So it's not quite a third, but you can see it's a full quarter, under a quarter, and a little bit over a quarter. That's in Queensland. Remember, 14% is the mark to be guaranteed a spot in the Senate. At 23%, you obviously get one person up, and at the next election, that will be Pauline Hanson. But then it's a question about preferences, about whether the remaining 9% goes over to the LNP or the remaining 9% from them goes over to One Nation. Interestingly, too, in Victoria, I apologise, that's where we are now. In Victoria, it's a higher number for One Nation than the LNP, and it is actually the highest supporting state in the country for One Nation is Victoria right now, where the margin between the government and One Nation is just 4 points. It is larger than that in New South Wales, larger than that nationally. So fascinating to watch. As for the rest of Australia, and this is not an offence to anyone living outside of the 3 states that I've mentioned thus far, statistically, it's a little bit of a sample from South Australia, Western Australia and Tasmania. Yes, there's smatterings in from the territories, but the outside and rest of Australia number. Now, part of the structural problem for the Liberal Party was that the rest of the Australian number used to be really good. The Western Australian proportion particularly was helped to make that a lot closer than, 12 points. Now, that is very significant when you have a look at the differences between, the 11 points, I should say, between the Liberal and National Party and the ALP. But again, One Nation in the rest of the country would be over 14%, and of course that would produce senators from Western Australia, where they've already produced one at the last election, South Australia, where, of course, Corey Bernardi's the leader right now, and fingers crossed in Tasmania, where our mate Lee Hanson will be joining us from later tonight. Now, as part of the future debate about whether Labor can continue to not have a majority of votes, but to have a majority of preferences go back their way, which provides them with a supermajority in the parliament. It's all about their ability to have the best story, or the one that people believe, on the key issues. The challenge for the Liberal Party is to come up with not definitions of the problem, but what are their solutions to the issues. We certainly know that One Nation has got clear answers to many of these questions, and they don't have to do such work because many of those positions have been the same for a very long time. Almost all of them are an echo of what worked for the party that took them up to doubling their parliamentary representation at the last election. Again, same poll from the Resolve poll that's going to be turning up in the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age and the Brisbane Times. So, top issues for people: keeping cost of living low, managing the finances. That's, of course, a reference to the broader government finances. Then it's health and aged care. Now, I think you could split healthcare and aged care, and let's see how they sit. But you know, I've talked a lot about how Gen X, one of the things that is affecting them is because they're starting to get line of sight to their parents and potentially their own lives in and around aged care, how that'll be paid for. There seems to be a double up between 2 and 4, but still, this is how they've categorised it: economic management and recovery. And again, back to point number 1, jobs and wages. That's your top 5 of the issues for Australian politics and Australian voters right now. Then 6 through 10, housing and rental prices are at 6. Crime and antisocial behaviour, this is a lot higher than any national political discussion often goes, but in places like Melbourne, in places like regional Queensland, or at least on the fringes of Brisbane, that's a massive issue. Education. Now, again, is this about getting easier access to university, or is this, as I believe it to be, people who think the current system is not good enough, and despite the hundreds of billions of dollars, the results keep going backwards? Then national security, and then managing natural disasters. Now, based off other polling, the only one of those 10 issues in which the Liberal Party is in front of anyone else is the 9th most important issue in the country, that being national security and defence. And again, it is very easy for people in and around the Liberal Party, and to a lesser extent One Nation. But of course, One Nation at this moment is not considered to be the party of government. They're playing, of course, to be opposition between now and the next election. What is the Liberal Party answer to cost of living? Now, is it going to be a repeat, largely, of what had been said before about a reduction in things like petrol taxes? Is it going to be bold ideas like instant asset write-off? Is it going to be major changes to the tax system that mean the current largest source of revenue to the government is the average working man or woman, and then by some margin is company tax, and then by some margin under $100 billion compared to almost $300 billion is the GST? I don't know. But again, this is where some of the meat needs to get on the bone. Now, obviously, any meat that's put on the bone by an opposition gets pulled apart by a government. But there has to be actual answers to many, if not all, of those before you start to get in the game. Because, yes, they have to break up with the government first. Remember, governments lose elections rather than oppositions win them necessarily. But also, for you to become a viable or attractive option is for not just this is a problem, but what is the potential solution? Which is why it is very important to note about the issues in this one poll and how they are ranked, and how often those of us on the centre-right of Australian politics talk about them versus, and you know, the cost of living's been what I've been thumping about for years in a row, but still, we talk a lot about energy. We talk a lot about renewable power. We talk a lot about nuclear, 12th most important issue to people. Immigration and refugees. Now, the same polls will tell us 50% of people think that too many people are coming in. 14th most important information. And again, for the Tiffany Teals or the Radical Greens, the environment and climate change sits below, among other things, the education system, crime, housing, healthcare and aged care. All of that matters, which is why I want to take some time talking about how the first pitch was made by the new leadership of the Liberal Party.